Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another NASCA Learning Lab. My name is Talona Felix. I am a workforce business consultant on the value team for UKG, formerly known as Kronos. I have 20 years of public sector experience working for two municipalities in the state of Arizona. I spent the last 8 years working for the 35th largest municipality in the country, managing their workforce management system. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with Betsy Thomas, the HR Director for Georgia Department of Corrections. Now, I'm going to refer to my notes as I introduce her to make sure I get all of her information correct. So, Betsy Thomas was appointed by Commissioner Homer Bryson as the Human Resource Director of Corrections in May of 2016. As director, Betsy is responsible for human resource management programs and functions, including recruitment and retention, compensation, hiring policies, awards and recognition, and staff professional development. Betsy began her career with Georgia Department of Corrections in 1994 as a probational officer in the Dublin Judicial Court System. She worked her way through the ranks and was promoted to Chief Probational Officer in 2010, followed by, in 2014, a developmental assignment in Georgia Department of Corrections Central Office, where she was responsible for the implementation and opening of 17-day reporting center light sites across the state. Later that year, she was promoted to Field Service Manager, having oversight of specialized training programs and probation operations and probation reporting centers and the day reporting centers. The Georgia Department of Corrections is the largest prison system in the United States, responsible for nearly 52,000 state prisoners, and it is the largest law enforcement agency in the state with approximately 10,500 employees. Betsy, thank you for joining us here today.
Good morning, Talona. Thank you for having me.
So before we get started, you might see the word true behind me over here. In case you were wondering what that is, Betsy, it's my little statement that says, dream until your dreams come true. So that's my statement that kind of gets me started every day.
Okay.
So let's start with you. So I'd like to start today's conversation about your journey and kind of doing a walk down memories past. So when you were first promoted to HR director about 5 years ago, can we start with what was that first year like?
So the first year as HR director was an eye-opening experience. I came from the field of probation, so I had not really worked inside the Human Resources Division for very long prior to becoming director. And upon my appointment of director, there were a lot of things that I wanted to change inside our Human Resources Department. Our reputation in the field was one of not being reactive, not providing customer service, not giving most efficient data or any data that was even effective to help the field run any of their facilities. So my number one goal was, of course, customer service and to provide the data and knowledge that the field needed to be able to run their facilities. So in the first year, we're trying to change customer service. We are trying to make sure we provide data to our facilities, and we get a federal Department of Labor complaint. So while I'm trying to learn corrections from a human resources perspective, I have a federal investigator contact me about all of our prison systems not paying out our overtime correctly and not having accurate timekeeping devices. So that's what I was hit with the first year.
Wow. You know, as an HR professional, I can tell you those are the type of stories that keep me up at night. And those are the type of stories that hit the front newspaper. And we know none of us want to be on the front page of the newspaper.
Absolutely. And it did hit the paper.
Those are the ones where you just want to bury your head and go, no, please don't.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you know, in today's environment, a lot of government agencies have continued to maintain like semi-automated time and attendance systems. For example, you know, Excel documents, access, databases, homegrown programs by IT departments. I can tell you before we implemented ours in my last municipality, that's what we had was a homegrown system from our IT department. And it was very rigorous to get anything done in that system. And, you know,
Yes.
some organizations are still even, you know, maintaining paper. So,
Well, and we were one of those.
you were one
We
of those. Yeah.
Well, we were a hybrid, basically. We had some form of the manual process with the paper timesheets, the validation on paper, the time adjustment forms, and then someone would have to key it into our system manually for it to process and try to keep up with the balances and everything. So we had a little bit of Excel, we had a little bit of a timekeeping management system, and we had some paper. So we had a mess, basically.
And while those programs have worked for years, I think it's becoming more important to consider new ways of tracking in light of compliance changes, audit findings, lawsuits, efficiency gains that we kind of need these days because we're expected to do more with less. So, you kind of started your story off by talking about that DOL finding and having to drive around the state
Absolutely.
with that compliance officer. So, can you tell me about your path that led you to finding kind of that automated workforce management system that kind of brought everything together versus the hybrid?
Absolutely. When we received the Federal Department of Labor complaint, we had to, of course, investigate. And of course, everyone at the facility was interviewing with the federal investigators and telling them, sometimes our timekeeping system, the clock doesn't work. Sometimes it's missing hours. Sometimes it doesn't save when you put your fingerprint on it. It doesn't calculate correctly. So we had to basically go back and pull 2 years worth of data from all of those facilities and go timesheet by timesheet on every employee at those facilities. So it took us almost 2 years to get through the entire department. And I had to travel to each of the facilities with the federal investigator and go over a presentation of what the complaints were, what we had done to investigate the complaints, and how we were going to solve the issues that the employees were complaining about. And one of them was the fact that they were not paid for overtime that they had worked until 45 to 60 days later. That was an issue because we did not have an accurate timekeeping system, nor one that you could pull reports from easily. So, in our search for a management system, we wanted to make sure that it was live, real time data. We wanted to make sure that we could pull reports from the system to actually show us in a timely manner who had been working the overtime. So, we get paid twice a month, on the 15th and the 30th. So we wanted to cut that payout time down from 60 days to possibly 30 or even 15. If we can do that. And we do operate on a 28-day time cycle for everyone in a law enforcement capacity. So those were some things that we were looking at based on the investigation that we had, because we had to go through paper documents and look at all of the overtime that the employees had earned. And then we had to try to pull reports from our system that it was just data on a lot of lines and looked like an Excel spreadsheet that you could not even decipher the information. So we really needed something to where it was easy for us to read and easy for the employee to read.
So, as you implemented the workforce management system to kind of bring everybody in, because I know going through those paper timesheets, besides paper cuts, it's an exhausting process.
It is.
And to ensure that you're doing it correctly. So now that you have kind of implemented a workforce management system, what has that really done for Georgia Department of Corrections?
So it's really given the employee a sense of um, believing in us, to the point where they actually can see that their time is being recorded accurately, that their supervisors are actually approving their entire timesheet, that their overtime or FLSA is being calculated correctly, and it's giving them a sense of where their leave balances fall into the accruals and the takes, as far as them asking for leave or having leave given to them by the state. So it's really given the employee a lot of assurance that things are being done correctly.
And I'm sure, that's increased employee morale throughout your organization as they have now faith in what you're doing.
Yes, yes, they now have faith that they're going to get paid appropriately and in a timely manner. I have not spoken with a DOL investigator in the last 9 months, which is a plus all in itself for me.
I'm sure. I
Yes,
remember my first DOL investigation, and I was thankful that I had a workforce management system that I could just, every report they wanted, every time card they wanted to
yes,
see, it was, easy. I could do it from my desk. I wasn't having to travel around. So I am sure that you are now thankful that all of that's at your fingertips as well.
absolutely. And one thing that we did not have either was an audit system. So the employee could say, I worked from 8 to 6:30, but my timesheet shows 8 to 4:30. Someone has altered my time.
Right.
We had absolutely no way of knowing who. So, that's very important to the employees, is to be able to know who is altering their information in the system and why. So
Right.
that's very important for them to be able to see that audit trail.
So now let's change gears a little bit and talk about where our paths first crossed, right? So we had the opportunity to work together in analyzing Georgia Department of Corrections workforce management data through our complementary value offering that we do for all public sector agencies. So as we kind of started this project, I remember you and I talking about one prison in particular, Augusta State Medical Prison. They're
Absolutely.
your largest prison. They have a different mission than, most of the other prisons throughout the system. And there was a real big concern about the FLSA overtime and the 28-day cycle for correction officers, the reliance on paper for call-in lists, time off requests, and covering those priority one posts. So, as we kind of dug into your data, what was the biggest surprise as we started kind of looking at it?
So when we started looking at Augusta State Medical Prison, I was certain that we were going to see that they were not managing their staff to the best of their ability and not utilizing everyone when it came to calling them in for overtime. I was certain that it was going to show that the same people are working over and over and over, and they were not utilizing all of what is called unused capacity as far as FLSK goes. So when we saw the data, it was actually evident that they actually needed more staff in order to cover their priority one post or all of the posts that they needed. And while we thought, or we could see that, yes, they're our highest earners for FLSA, that they are actually fourth with the number of our facilities per capita. So just because they earn the highest doesn't mean that per capita they're abusing the amount of FLSA that we're paying out. So that was very eye-opening to us.
I remember when I worked at my last municipality, our public safety organizations used to tell to me all the time, don't pick on me because I'm the big dog, right? I'm the largest department. I've got the most employees. Of course, by hour, I'm going to have the most overtime
Yes,
just by the sheer numbers. But please look at me in a way where you can tell whether or not is a problem or not a problem.
right. Which helped us. You helped us do that by actually having that data that we could actually dive into and look at.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about this overtime concern, because I think, I'm seeing this across the nation where we're seeing, local governments and states having to cut overtime budgets because, right now there's an all-time high for services, but that revenue is kind of declining with our current environment. And so, you combined that with, now they're looking at furloughs or looking at other, strategic ways to cut overtime. One of the things you brought up was this concept of unused capacity. And some of the biggest culprits of overtime spikes are those unplanned absences, scheduling problems. And when those come up, you really got to take advantage of the staff that you have that has capacity before they hit overtime versus automatically assigning that overtime. So, having that real-time visibility into employees' schedules and where they're at in their 28-day cycle in terms of overtime to find that, qualified, certified, and available person to control that overtime looking at areas of opportunity to reduce that FLSA overtime, how has that visibility in real-time data helped you?
So it has helped us to see that, they're not utilizing everybody that could be called in for overtime. They tend to call in the ones that maybe they know will answer the telephone. So, of course, we've got officers that have earned over $30,000 in overtime for the year. That's almost, that's an extra salary. That's doubling their salary. While we have those that may not be called in because they may not be one of the favorites, or, they may not be called in because they complain every time they have to come in. But this has really given us a sense of, is there favoritism going on at the facility level? The warden can actually dig down into the data, look at who's calling in, look at patterns of abuse possibly, and actually dig into why only certain people are getting to earn the overtime.
All right, so I'm going to pause because, like working from home, my first grader came to open the door to ask a question and realized I was on screen. And so let me
Yes,
shut my door.
no problem, no problem.
See, talk about real conversation, right?
Real conversation. I understand. It happens a lot these days. Yes.
So, one of the things that we kind of discovered also by analyzing the data was it was important to look at it from different angles. And so by doing so, we found a couple additional surprises in the data. Do you remember we found one correctional officer that had worked 76 days in a row, meaning every single day, Saturday, Sunday, whole 9 yards, 76 days in a row? Didn't mean necessarily that they put in a full shift, but they reported some hours worked for 76 days in a row. And they weren't even at the facility that you were concerned about. They were at a facility that was lower in overtime percentage and overtime hours. And then
Right.
we found, one, behavioral correctional counselor that, worked an average of 72 hours a week for 14 weeks. When
Yes.
you start seeing hours like that, you start worrying about fatigue, safety, risk compliances. Um, so as you've kind of looked at this data now, what other valuable insights have you gained by having a workforce management system to see these things?
So we were able to talk with the wardens in those situations, and they were not even aware, because they did not have data that they could look at daily, that this was happening. So they've been able to adjust some schedules. They've been able to point out the importance of officer safety, or fatigue, and show them, the employee may not even realize that I've actually done something work related for the last 76 days. They're just that engaged in work, and maybe they don't have an outside life, but now you've got to have that family life balance. And this gives the warden an opportunity, or the supervisors an opportunity, to actually point out, you've got to find something else to do. You've got to find a hobby in order to stay healthy, because if you don't stay healthy, you're not as good to me as you are if you were a well-balanced employee.
And
It's
that's
actually
true.
able to pull that up. And from this visibility, the wardens or supervisors can sit at their home at night, and they can see who shows up on second shift and who doesn't show up. And they actually a lot of times can point out, I'm seeing a pattern. I've checked the on-site report for the last 5 days, and so hasn't been here. So I see a pattern. Maybe this so-and-so has called out, a day before a holiday, a day after a holiday. Whereas the supervisor, because they have so much more on their plate, doesn't really think about that. They're just trying to fill a priority post. So it gives the warden a lot more visibility as to who is on their property and when. Even in the case of a bomb threat, or some type of tragic event going on at the facility, we can log on and see exactly who is on the premises. And that's very important from a safety standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree. I remember we had a flood. So crises occur every day in our local communities, from, forest fires threatening to burn down, half of California this last couple months, hurricanes coming through the Gulf, to, like you said, a bomb threat, and understanding who's on the ground, where your staff are at, who can you bring in, because crises disrupt our day-to-day work streams
Absolutely.
100%. And so, those unforeseen events can happen at any time, right? Because all of a sudden you wake up today and it's raining and you're
Yeah.
like, well, I didn't
Yes.
expect that flood.
Yes, exactly.
And so, I found having a workforce management system allowed us to be agile and pivot quickly. So when that
Mhm.
emergency happened, I was able to put an immediate pay code in or an accounting string in to start tracking that time. So if we needed to get federal funding or our governor was going to try and, do a state of emergency to get federal funding from FEMA. And so, as you look at some of the crises that have happened throughout your organization, how has moving to that workforce management system helped you pivot quickly to respond to those situations?
So it's interesting that you talk about that because hurricane season is upon us, and every year it never fails. Probably for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had to evacuate a prison. And it's very important that we keep track of everybody that is working on that evacuation, whether it be on the ground at the facility, whether it be training staff that has to come in and drive a bus, transporting inmates, whether it be counselors or medical staff having to get healthcare records together because they're going, they have to be loaded on the bus with the offenders. It helps us track those specific projects because, like you mentioned, we can apply for federal funding, but we have got to be able to detail every bit of time that was used just for that project. So in that arena, it's been very important to us. We also have had a lot going on because we do have a lot of our facilities with 50% vacancy rates when it comes to correctional officers. So we have what's called a tiger team that has been assigned to different facilities. This tiger team, we pull correctional officers from each other prison in that specific geographical region and send them to the prison that has the most need. And they may be there, and that may be their work site for a month. It may be their work site for 2 months, but we need to be able to pay them out of the budget for the particular facility that they're working at, not their home facility. So with these project codes and pay codes, this gives us the ability to track that information as well.
That's great. I know tracking that time to appropriately put it in a budget, right? Because everybody's got their budget and everybody wants to
Everybody
protect
has
their
a,
budget.
and the wardens are like, no, don't charge my budget. No, that didn't come from me.
Yep.
Even though it all comes out of one big pot.
That's right. Even though it doesn't matter, it comes out of the big pot
No,
at the end of the day. It's still
yes,
their little pot that they got their pot of gold.
yes. They're looking at their little pot of gold. You're right.
Yep. So you talked a little bit about hiring and staff movement. Can you tell us the role that workforce management has helped you in making those hiring and staffing decisions?
Um, what it's done really is given us an opportunity to reach some of the more technologically advanced staff members and actually show them that we are into the 21st century when it comes to timekeeping, and helping with their morale and helping with the retention rate. Not being able to know how much time you have on the books, not being able to know if your paper leave slip got approved by your supervisor, that brings on stressors that our employees don't need. Those just extra stressors. So it's helped us in that capacity to help them feel more comfortable.
So, talking about employees, implementing a workforce management system is kind of a culture shock in some instances.
Yes.
And so, as you implemented the system, how did the organization adjust to it?
Well, it was a hard sell. What we had, they knew was not working. But when we implemented previously what we implemented that back in 2012, and it was a nightmare from the beginning. So they did not have the most support in us to bring on a new timekeeping system. But we had to get buy-in from the warden level on down to the officer level, to the secretarial level, to the lowest level possible. And even some of the wardens, they were apprehensive because I kept telling them this is going to help us save in overtime costs. We're allotted roughly $20 million per fiscal year for overtime cost. Well, last fiscal year, we paid out $26 million. So we had to find a system that could help us manage it. And that was really what we needed, was a way to manage our overtime. And I tried to explain to them how this system would do it. And several of them were, it's not going to work. I don't understand how this is going to help me reduce my overtime costs. Well, one facility in particular, the warden and I had a conversation, and he said, okay, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to have an open mind. Well, his FLSA payout was reduced by $30,000 in the first month.
Wow,
And,
that's a big reduction.
and he could not believe it, all because, one, they could manage it. They could actually see what was going on in real time, but also they caught a lot of the employees, or saw that a lot of the employees were pencil whipping us. And when I say pencil whipping us, I mean they were lying on their timesheets. They would put their end time and they weren't even at work yet, but it was a paper timesheet. So who could
question it?
Who could question them, right? They could say, well, the time clock wasn't working, so I had to fill out a time adjustment form. Who could question them? So this particular management system works, and it actually stopped our employees from being able to beat us when it comes to overtime.
And that payroll leakage is something that some organizations don't think about or realize, how much it does happen. But it does, unfortunately. You'd like to have faith in every employee and say they're going to do the right thing. But, sometimes that, I got caught by a stoplight and I'm an extra 15 minutes late. It's okay. 9 a.m. is fine.
Right. It's okay. I was here at 6, even though I didn't get here till 6:30,
Right.
So, but this particular system, it put a halt to that.
Yeah. And I think you saw overall throughout your entire pilot system, right? So, as one warden was like talking it up, oh my goodness, this saved us money. The next warden's like, get me on that system. And
Right.
then they save some money. And I
Yes.
think by the time it was all said and done, when you had kind of piloted, you came out almost $75,000 savings in a 9-month period before you went live fully with the entire organization.
Yes, we did. We started with 11 facilities in March, and we were able to pilot those facilities until we just went live with our entire organization on November the 14th of this year. So I'm looking forward to training the other wardens and other HR staff on the system itself and how to get the most out of it and what to look for, what kind of reports to look for. So yes, we reduced our FLSA payout by $75,000 in just a 9-month period.
Wow, that's amazing results.
Yeah.
So, we kind of talked about the employee and warden's responses to the system. What was the central office and or even the commissioner's response to the system?
Well, the commissioner is the one that really, he kept saying, I know the employees are beating us. I just don't know how. I know there's absolutely no way we should be paying out this much in overtime. I know they're beating us. So he was very sure that we would find this out as a result of going live with the system. And in fact, because he was so supportive, then the regional directors, they got on board, and really it started from the top down. And so central HR, because the implementation of the old system in 2012 did not go so well, of course, they were very apprehensive about it, but we also knew we had to get it right. So we did not want people to have a biased opinion of, if it wasn't right, that this is going to be just like the old system. It's not going to help us. It's not going to be accurate. It's not going to be true. So we wanted to make sure that we did it right the first time. So there was a lot of planning and preparation that went into making sure we got it right. And so with the push from the commissioner's office on down, central office staff really got on board and did what it took to make it happen.
That's great. I know that top-down support is vital in the organization accepting it, right? Because they know that all levels of the organization are behind this and that they can't bury their heads in the sand like ostriches. They need to, embrace it and actually work through. And I know change management is always a concern as you go through those things. So
And,
it's great to hear.
even from the support that we get from the regional directors and the wardens and the commissioner, we actually have a call each week with, when we were doing the pilot, we set up a call each week on Fridays with all of the wardens and all the HR staff that were on our 11 sites for a pilot, and we went through all of their data with them to make sure, hey, this person is at the top of your, reaching the capacity. Can you let them go home? Can you give them an adjusted work schedule? We kind of work through that with them to give them an opportunity to see and manage and see exactly what we were seeing and kind of explain where we were coming from. And they took that to heart and actually started just adjusting some schedules and knowing what to look at the 2-week mark to see who's close to the 164-hour threshold of a 28-day cycle. Who's going to reach that threshold by the time they finish this schedule. So, we really stayed in communication with them weekly about all of their data.
Your story is a great journey, right? Starting as the HR director with, a DOL complaint of that magnitude right out of the gate to where you've come today. So, looking at that whole journey, what would you say your lessons learned have been?
So I wish we would have done it a lot sooner. I wish we would have had real-time data and a system that actually worked a lot sooner. And really, I think that would have been a huge benefactor for the entire agency. We could have fiscally been a lot more sound and more efficient.
Yeah, I hear you. That efficiency gains, especially in this time, is so utterly important for everybody to find where they can, reduce those costs or even increase productivity so that they can shift those staff to work on priority missions versus, doing manual, paper timesheets and
Right.
stuff.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So, well, Betsy, thank you so much for your time today. It was great reminiscing through your journey and
Yes.
our journey together as we looked
Learn
at your
together.
data.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, we want to just thank everybody else for joining the NASCA Learning Lab and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much, Talona.